She wasn't supposed to touch anything on the third floor. That was the first rule they gave her. Don't go upstairs. Don't ask questions. Don't look at the photographs on the wall near the east staircase. She was told this on her first morning by a housekeeper with tired eyes who said it the way people say things they've said too many times: flat, practiced, final. And Amara Siddiqui, 24 years old, 2 months behind on rent, with a mother in a hospital bed and exactly $11 in her bank account, nodded and said she understood. She didn't understand. Not yet, but she would. Amara had taken the job through an agency that placed domestic staff in high-end households across the city. The pay was good, better than good. The kind of number that makes you stop scrolling and read the listing twice. The household was the Raza estate. Cyrus Raza. If you lived in this city, you knew that name the way you knew the name of the tallest building downtown. Not because you'd ever been inside, but because it was always there, always visible, always casting a shadow you walked through without thinking. Cyrus Raza was 51 years old, the founder of 3 separate companies, and a man who had not given a public interview in over 4 years. He was, by every account, completely unreachable. Amara's job was to clean the lower floors, maintain the kitchen, assist with household errands, and stay invisible. That last part wasn't written in the contract, but it was understood. She was good at being invisible. She had been practicing most of her life. The estate itself was the kind of place that made you feel the weight of other people's wealth in your chest. Not because it was showy. It wasn't. It was understated in a way that was almost worse. Everything was chosen carefully, placed deliberately, lit beautifully. There were no unnecessary things. Every object had a reason for being exactly where it was. Walking through those rooms felt like walking through someone's very controlled, very private mind. She noticed on her second day that there were no family photos anywhere on the lower floors. Just art. Cold, beautiful, expensive art that meant nothing to her. But no faces, no people, no evidence that anyone had ever laughed inside these walls. That felt like a question worth holding on to. If you're the kind of person who notices things others walk past, the small details, the silences that say more than words, then you already know exactly why this story is going to stay with you. We're Midnight Story Room, and if you're new here, subscribe and settle in. This one's going to take you somewhere real. For the first 3 weeks, Amara worked without incident. She arrived early, did her job thoroughly, left without speaking to anyone except the head housekeeper, Mrs. Ghani, and the groundskeeper who brought vegetables from the garden on Tuesdays. She didn't see Cyrus Raza at all during those 3 weeks. He was present in the house. She could tell by the coffee cup left on the study counter, by the light under the east corridor door late at night, but he moved through his own home like something that didn't want to be seen. Then one evening, a Thursday, she stayed late because a pipe under the kitchen sink had started leaking, and she'd offered to wait for the plumber. Mrs. Ghani had gone home. The groundskeeper had left. The house was almost completely silent except for the rain hitting the tall windows and the distant sound of something, music maybe, coming from upstairs. The plumber was delayed by 2 hours. Amara sat at the kitchen table with a cup of tea, watching the rain streak down the glass, thinking about her mother's latest test results, thinking about the prescription she still hadn't filled, thinking about whether any of it was going to be okay. She didn't hear him come downstairs. "You're still here." She turned so fast she nearly knocked over her cup. He was standing in the kitchen doorway, tall, slightly rumpled, like a man who had been working for hours and forgotten to care about anything else. He was older in person than in photographs, not in a bad way, in the way that some people grow more solid with age, more themselves. He was looking at her not with annoyance, but with the mild surprise of someone who had forgotten other people existed. "The plumber was delayed," she said quickly. "I'm sorry, I should have left a note. I didn't think—" "It's fine." He walked to the counter and filled a glass of water. Then he looked at her again. "You're the new one." "Amara," she said. "I started 3 weeks ago." He nodded slowly, like he was filing that away. "You make good coffee," he said. And then he left. That was it. That was the whole conversation. But for reasons she couldn't explain, she thought about it the whole drive home. The next incident was 2 weeks later, and it was her fault entirely. She was cleaning the hallway near the east staircase, not on the third floor, just near it, and a photograph slipped from the wall. She had barely brushed it, barely touched it, but the wire at the back had been hanging by almost nothing, and the frame came off and hit the marble floor, and the glass cracked cleanly across the middle. She stood there looking at it with her heart in her throat. It was a photograph of a young woman, maybe late 20s, dark hair, laughing at something outside the frame, the kind of laugh that reaches the eyes. On the back, when Amara carefully turned it over, there were 2 words written in pen. Just 2. "Come back." She didn't know what it meant, but she felt it somewhere deep. She reported the broken frame to Mrs. Ghani immediately. Waited all day for some kind of consequence. Instead, that evening, Cyrus Raza appeared in the hallway where she was finishing up and said simply, "Did you look at it?" She hesitated. Then, yes. Good, he said, and walked away again. She stood in that hallway for a full minute, trying to figure out what that meant. She never fully did. But good was not what she had expected. And that word, that single, quiet word, changed something about how she moved through that house. She started to pay more attention, not in an intrusive way, just in the way that some people naturally pay attention to things that don't add up. She noticed that the third floor was cleaned by an outside service that came once a month and spoke to no one. She noticed that Cyrus never ate dinner at the long dining table. He always ate at the small table in the kitchen, alone, with a book open that he rarely seemed to actually read. She noticed that once a week, a car came and took him somewhere in the late afternoon and brought him back quieter than he left. And she noticed that he started appearing in rooms she was working in. Not intrusively. Just present. Refilling his water. Checking something on his phone. Existing nearby without explanation. One afternoon he said out of nowhere, "What are you thinking about right now?" She was scrubbing the counter. She stopped. "My mother," she said honestly, because she was too tired to construct a more careful answer. He was quiet for a moment. "Is she sick?" "Yes. I'm sorry. Thank you." Another silence. Then, "What does she need?" And something about the directness of it, the complete absence of the polite, pointless phrases people usually offered, made Amara's eyes sting in a way she hadn't expected. She looked down at the counter. "More than I can give her right now," she said. He didn't say anything else. He just left the kitchen, and the next morning, Mrs. Ghani handed Amara an envelope and told her it was an advance on 3 months of salary. No explanation, no strings attached, just an envelope and a look from Mrs. Ghani that said, "Don't ask." Amara sat in her car in the driveway for 10 minutes before she could drive. She told herself it was generosity, the kind rich people sometimes showed when they felt like it, without expecting anything back, because it cost them nothing. She told herself not to read into it, not to attach anything to it. She had seen enough of the world to know that kindness from powerful people often had a shelf life, but then things kept happening that didn't fit that explanation. He started talking to her. Not often. Cyrus Raza was not a man built for small talk, but in short, precise exchanges that somehow covered more ground than long conversations with other people. He asked about her design background. She had studied graphic design before money made finishing impossible. He asked what she would have done with it. She told him. He listened in a way that most people don't listen, without planning his next sentence, without waiting for a pause to redirect toward himself. Just listening. She asked him once, carefully, about the photograph on the staircase wall, the one she had broken. He was quiet so long she thought he wasn't going to answer. "My daughter," he said finally. "She left. 4 years ago." A pause. "I don't know where she is." "I'm sorry," Amara said. "She was angry," he said. "She had reasons." Another long pause. "I had reasons too. We were both right, and we both handled it wrong." He looked at the window. That's the most useless kind of conflict, when everyone is right and it still destroys everything. Amara thought about her own father, about the last conversation they'd had, 8 years ago, standing in the doorway of an apartment she was leaving. She thought about how she had been right, and he had been right, and they had both said things in the wrong way, and then he was gone, and she had never quite figured out how to undo it. She didn't say any of that. But she thought it, and somehow, she felt certain that he knew she understood in a way that wasn't just sympathy. The shift happened gradually, then all at once. That's how these things always go. Cyrus had been dealing with a crisis in one of his companies. She gathered this from the fragments she overheard, the late nights, the tension that moved through the house like weather. One evening she came to drop off files that had been delivered and found him at his desk with his head in his hands, surrounded by papers, completely still. She set the files down quietly. She was almost out the door when he said, "Do you ever feel like you built something your whole life and then one day you look at it and you don't know if it was worth it?" She turned back. He wasn't looking at her, he was looking at the desk. "Yes," she said. "What did you do?" "I decided the thing I'd built wasn't the point," she said. "The point was whether I was still someone I recognized while building it." He looked up at her then, really looked, the way he hadn't quite done before. "Sit down," he said, and she did. And they talked for 2 hours, about work and purpose, and what it cost to want more than you were given and what it cost to get it, about his daughter, about her mother, about the difference between a life that looks successful and a life that actually feels like yours. She walked out of that house that night feeling like something fundamental had shifted, not in the situation, but in herself. like a door inside her had opened that she hadn't realized was closed. Then the accusations started. It was Cyrus's business partner, a man named Sohail Farouk, who started it. Amara heard it first through Mrs. Ghani, in hushed, uncomfortable tones, that people were talking, that it didn't look right, that a man like Cyrus getting close to the help was the kind of thing that got around. And then it became less hushed. There was a board meeting she wasn't at where her name was apparently mentioned as a liability. There was a conversation between Sohail and Cyrus that she walked past and caught the edges of. "She's nobody, Cyrus. You're letting a maid distract you from—" She didn't hear the rest. She walked away before she could hear the rest. But she heard enough. She handed in her notice that evening, left it with Mrs. Ghani in an envelope. No drama, no confrontation. Just a quiet, clean exit. The way she had always handled things that hurt too much to stay inside. She was packed and ready to leave the next morning when Cyrus appeared at the staff entrance. He had the envelope in his hand, unopened. He set it on the table between them. "Sohail doesn't run this house," he said. "I know," she said, "but he's not wrong that it's become complicated." "Complicated how?" His voice was steady, not defensive, just asking. She looked at him. "You know how." The silence between them was one of those silences that contains an entire conversation. He looked at her the way he had that night in the study. Clear, direct, no performance. "I don't want you to go," he said. "That's not a good enough reason to stay." "What would be?" She thought about that. "An honest one," she said. He nodded slowly. He looked out the window at the garden, then back at her. "I haven't been honest with many people in a long time," he said, "including myself." A pause. "But I know that the last few months have been different because of you. Not because of what you do here, because of who you are in it." She didn't say anything. "Stay," he said, "not as staff. I'll figure out what that means as we go. But stay." She didn't say yes immediately. That's important. She went home. She sat with her mother, who was having a better day, and they drank tea and watched the rain, and Amara told her, not everything, but enough. Her mother, who was a woman who had survived more than most people knew, listened carefully and then said, "You've spent your whole life being careful not to want too much. Maybe it's time to find out what happens when you want exactly as much as you deserve." The months that followed were complicated, real, and occasionally difficult in ways that simple stories don't capture. Sohail Farouk's opposition hardened when it became clear that Amara was becoming a real presence in Cyrus's life, not just personally, but professionally. Because it turned out that the girl who had studied design and quietly noticed everything had a mind that Cyrus found invaluable. She started consulting, informally, on the rebranding of one of his struggling companies, then formally. Then she was in rooms where decisions were made, and people who had dismissed her were quietly revising their assessments. She was not soft about it. She did not make herself smaller to make other people comfortable. She had done that for too long. Sohail eventually resigned. This was presented publicly as a strategic restructuring. Everyone in those circles understood what it actually meant. Cyrus's daughter reached out 14 months after Amara entered the picture. Not because of Amara directly, but because Cyrus had changed in ways that his daughter, who was watching from a careful distance, had noticed. He had become less defended, more honest. The kind of person his daughter had given up hoping he could be. Their reunion was not simple or clean, but it began. And Amara, who understood better than most what it meant to have a door that had been closed too long slowly open again, gave it exactly the space it needed. If there's someone in your life who saw something in you that you hadn't fully seen in yourself yet, someone who stayed when staying was complicated, who told you the honest thing instead of the easy thing, drop their name in the comments, or just say, "I know exactly who." This community understands. And if this story moved something in you, share it with someone who needs to hear it tonight. Some stories arrive at exactly the right moment. There is a version of Amara's life where she stays invisible, where she takes the job, does it quietly, leaves at the end of each day, and spends her years being careful and small and safe. That version is not a bad life. It is the life that a lot of good, tired, careful people live. But it is not the life that was waiting for her on the other side of paying attention, of speaking honestly, of refusing to disappear, even when disappearing would have been easier. She entered that house with a mop and $11 and a mother she was trying to save. She left it, not running from it, but walking forward from it, as a woman who had built something real inside those walls. Not a title, not a company, not immediately, something more foundational than that. She left as someone who knew her own value clearly enough that no one else could set it for her again. And Cyrus, standing at the window of the estate the morning she moved the last of her things into the east wing, not as staff, but as his partner in every sense of the word, watched her cross the garden in the early light and thought about all the ways a person can live in a house and never truly be present in it. And how one quiet, careful, extraordinary woman had taught him the difference. He had built an empire. She had walked into it with nothing. And somewhere along the way, without either of them quite planning it, they had built something better than an empire. They had built a life that felt like it belonged to both of them, completely.